The void of space burned with the remnants of shattered fleets. Once proud warships, capable of leveling entire planets, drifted in silence, their hulls scarred by weapons they never saw coming. To any outside observer, it would seem like a massacre, a hopeless battle fought by an inferior force against an enemy that should have crushed them effortlessly. But they didn't understand. They never did, because raw power was never the answer. Not in this war. Not against us. They came with arrogance, their vast armadas blotting out the stars, their voices booming across all frequencies with the confidence of conquerors who had never known defeat. The Acceleri Imperium had spent centuries carving their name into the bones of lesser civilizations, wiping away history and replacing it with their own. When they set their sights on Earth, they didn't see an enemy. They saw a resource, a minor inconvenience, a primitive world to be stripped bare and discarded when it had nothing left to offer. The first wave arrived without warning. Thousands of ships, each one bristling with weapons powerful enough to turn continents to dust, descended on our system with cold, mechanical efficiency. We were given one chance: surrender unconditionally, or be erased. They had done this before, so many times that they no longer expected resistance. And when we refused, they reacted with the same answer they had given 100 others: overwhelming force. But what they didn't realize, what no invading force ever truly understood, was that humans don't fight wars the way others do. We never had the luxury of being the strongest, the fastest, or the most technologically advanced. Our history was one of adaptation, of finding ways to turn impossible odds into winnable fights. And when we looked at the Acceleri's warships, their devastating planet-killer weapons, their energy shields that had deflected every attack from every species they had ever faced, we saw something they didn't. We saw weakness. Their ships were built to annihilate. Their weapons were designed to destroy fleets and reduce worlds to rubble. But they had spent so long crushing their enemies with brute force that they had forgotten how to prepare for an enemy that didn't play by their rules. They had never fought someone like us. The first engagement should have been an easy victory for them. We sent no fleets to meet them in orbit. We launched no counterattack as they moved into position. They expected resistance. Desperate, panicked resistance. Instead, they got silence. The kind that makes predators uneasy. When the Acceleri fleet commander finally gave the order to fire, their weapons powered up, energy crackling along the spines of their warships, ready to unleash devastation. And then nothing. Their guns refused to fire. Their targeting systems went haywire. The shields they had relied on for centuries flickered and died like candle flames snuffed out by an unseen wind. In an instant, the most powerful war machine the galaxy had ever known was reduced to a collection of floating, helpless metal husks. Panic set in. Solari ships reeled in confusion, their captains barking desperate orders, trying to make sense of the impossible. They had prepared for an enemy that would fight them with missiles, railguns, and energy weapons. But we didn't fight them at all. We simply made their weapons useless. Their technology, the very thing that had made them an unstoppable force, had turned against them. The systems they had designed to dominate the battlefield were now little more than scrap. And as their fleet lay stranded, powerless and vulnerable, they finally realized the truth. They had never been the apex predators of this war. They had been prey all along. And we were just getting started. Aboard the UNSV Harbinger, Commander Elias Voss stood in silence, watching the impossible unfold. The tactical display flickered with a mess of distorted signals, the Acceleri fleet unraveling before his eyes. Weapons offline. Shields dead. Thrusters failing one by one as their systems collapsed under a pressure they couldn't see, couldn't understand. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt like waiting for a corpse to realize it was already dead. His earpiece crackled. "Voss, you seeing this?" Lieutenant Rise, his systems officer, had spent the last 12 hours running numbers that made no sense. "They're blind, sir." Completely dead in the water. A pause, thick with the weight of the unspoken. How long until they figure it out? That was the question, wasn't it? They always figured it out eventually. Even the most arrogant species in the galaxy knew when it was being hunted. The XLR had relied on technology for so long that they had forgotten what it meant to fight without it. But they weren't stupid. They were conquerors, born and bred for war. And right now, they were trapped in a battlefield where the rules had changed, where their greatest strength had become their greatest weakness. It was only a matter of time before one of them figured out how to strike back. Voss exhaled, pressing his fingers against the cold steel of the command rail. He wanted to savor this moment, the sheer, terrifying scale of what they had done. He had spent his entire career preparing for a war humanity was never supposed to win. Studying the XLR's strategies, their weapons, the way they crushed resistance with overwhelming force. He had seen what happened to the civilizations that resisted. Burned worlds. Silent tombs. And now, in the span of a single hour, humanity had broken the unbreakable. But victory was a dangerous illusion. Reyes, keep an eye on their comms. The second they get a signal through, I want to know about it. Reyes didn't answer immediately. Her fingers danced over the console, her face pale under the dim glow of the bridge lights. Sir, her voice dropped, barely more than a whisper. Something's wrong. They're not panicking. Voss frowned. He stepped closer to the display, eyes narrowing. The XLR fleet should have been in chaos ships trying to flee, desperate captains screaming for answers. Instead, they were waiting. Silent. And then it hit him. They know, he murmured. His stomach went cold. They knew before we fired the first shot. The realization crashed over him like a wave, dragging him under. The XLR had come expecting victory, but their silence now spoke of something far worse. They had prepared for this. Not for a battle, not for resistance, but for what came after. For the moment, humanity thought it had won. A warning siren blared, cutting through the stillness like a knife. Reyes turned, eyes wide. Sir, I'm picking up. The deck lurched. Lights flickered. The ship groaned as something unseen pressed against it, a force that didn't register on any human scale of physics. Voss grabbed the command rail, his breath short. And then, from the darkness beyond the wreckage, something moved. Not a ship. Not a weapon. Something else. And it had been waiting for them. Voss Rice's voice cracked. Something just pinged us. The words barely registered before the ship jolted again, a deep, guttural sound vibrating through the hull. Not an impact. Not a weapon. It was like the harbinger had been noticed. Talk to me, Voss snapped, his knuckles white against the command rail. Rhea's fingers flew over the console, her screen a riot of static and corrupted signals. No origin point. No energy signature. But it's here it knows where we are. A calm burst erupted from the XLR fleet, high frequency, jagged. The first sign of life since their weapons went dead. Voss turned toward the screen as the distorted transmission cut through the interference, words twisting into something human ears weren't meant to understand. Then it shifted. Adapted. And suddenly, the voice on the bridge wasn't alien. You thought it was a weapon. The voice dripped with something ancient, something that didn't belong in the cold logic of warfare. It was never a weapon. Silence strangled the bridge. Voss's pulse hammered against his ribs. Reyes, cut that signal now. I can't, she whispered. Because it wasn't coming from the XLR. It was inside their systems, crawling through the comm lines, spreading like a virus. And worse, far worse, was the way the XLR ships had stopped moving. The drifting wrecks were no longer floundering. They were aligning. The enemy wasn't fighting back. They were activating something. A second voice cut in over the comms, raw, panicked. Do not engage. This is Captain Halem of the Pioneer. Do not engage. It's not them. It's static. Then screaming. Then nothing. Voss turned toward Rise, but she was already shaking her head. They're gone, she said. The whole damn ship. His stomach twisted. The Pioneer had been outside the conflict zone, observing. They hadn't fired a single shot. And now they were gone. The deck lights flickered, and Voss knew whatever had been waiting in the dark, whatever had just answered their challenge, was still hungry. And they had just given it an entire war to feed on. "Pull us back," Voss ordered, but the words felt hollow. There was nowhere to go. Whatever had taken the Pioneer had done it in seconds, without a shot fired. And now, the Harbinger was next in line. Rhea's hands shook as she worked the console. FTL drive's dead. She swallowed, shaking her head. It's not damage. It's just off. Like it doesn't exist anymore. A cold weight settled in Voss' gut. No energy surge. No breach. Something had turned it off. Not just the engine, the concept of it. As if the laws of physics had changed just for them. The auxiliary ships completed their alignment. What was left of their fleet had rearranged into something deliberate. The gaps between the ships weren't random. They formed a shape, a pattern so precise it made Voss's skin crawl. And then they began to speak. Not over comms. Not through static. The XLR themselves. Their guttural, war-hardened language was gone. Now, through whatever nightmare force had seized control, they spoke as one. You have opened the door. The words didn't come from a single source. They echoed from the walls, from the displays, from the silence between breaths. You thought it was war. It was never war. Voss clenched his jaw. Then what the hell is this? A sound filled the bridge. A low, resonant clicking, rhythmic and deep, as if something immense was breathing just beyond the veil of reality. Then the auxiliary fleet, every ship, every war-torn wreck began to vanish. One by one, slipping away like water draining from a cracked hull. They weren't warping. They weren't burning. They were simply ceasing to be. Ray's voice wavered. Where are they going? The air turned wrong. The kind of wrong that had nothing to do with science, nothing to do with weapons or strategy. A wrongness that pressed into the bones, into the soul. Voss looked at the shifting void where the XLR had been. He thought back to the signal, to the whisper that had crawled into their systems. They aren't going anywhere, he murmured. His throat was dry. They're being collected. And then the Harbinger's lights went out.